Hi, my name is Laura, and welcome to my podcast, Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations, and through these discussions, you will hear why 9 times out of 10, the book wins. I'll also share different behind-the-scenes trivia I've discovered in my research, which by learning makes the story all the more interesting. If you love either books, movies, or both, this is the perfect podcast for you. This probably already goes without saying, but there will be spoilers for both the book and the movie in this podcast. So if you plan on reading the book or watching the movie, go do that first, and then come back and listen to this. And now, without further ado, let's get right into it. Hello, and thank you for listening. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. And if you find these podcasts interesting, I would love it if you would share it with your friends and family. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram as well as my SoundCloud. Anyway, today's book is Wonder by R.J. Palacio. It was written in 2012, and then in 2017 they made a movie by the same name. So the synopsis is we have a 10-year-old boy who has Treacher Collins syndrome, and it's a condition that affects the development of the face. In the book, they don't call it Treacher Collins, they call it something else for some reason, but that's what it is. And so he's going into 5th grade for the first time after being homeschooled his whole life. And so this book goes through the perspective of him, whose name is August, his sister Via, as well as the perspectives of a few other students at school, as well as 2 of Via's friends. And it just goes through the daily life and the drama of school throughout the whole school year. And Augie has his new friend Jack, and they get bullied by this kid named Julian, along with Julian's buddies. But by the end of the book, everyone is happy and things end up great. This book was a quick, easy read, and I enjoyed the different perspectives. I think if it stuck with just Augie's, I probably would have gotten maybe a little bit bored. And not to be a downer, but I felt like this book was a little too perfect. People were saying it was going to make me cry, I guess happy and sad tears, but it didn't. Though that may be because the saddest part of the book is when their family dog dies, which honestly, that doesn't really do much for me, and it's just such a cliche to have the dog die, so I didn't find that very sad. Having said that, with fiction, sometimes I figure, it's not real anyway, so may as well make it happy, because sometimes real life can be hard enough. So I kind of have mixed feelings with things like that. And Palacio was inspired to write this when she went to an ice cream parlor and with her son, and they saw a girl who had Treacher Collins, and her son was scared by the girl's face and he started crying, and Palacio just felt awkward, and so they just hurried and left. And she felt so bad about just how she handled that situation. And so what she did was, as a way to make up for it, she researched this and wrote a book about it to help kids and adults alike just to know, just to get that perspective of someone who has that condition and see it from their point of view. And so the author, she doesn't have Treacher Collins, and none of her children do. And so even though she did her research and she went to, the centers where she got to meet these kids and adults with it, she herself doesn't have it. And so it just made me want to read a book of someone who has a more personal experience about it. And so I did. I read a book called Normal, A Mother and Her Beautiful Son, which was written by Magdalena Newman, and it was published just this year, 2020. In the beginning of the book, she talks about when Wonder came out and how it was a big deal for her family, just to be represented in that way. And so reading that and how they appreciated the book made me also appreciate the book more, just, trying to see it as someone from a family that, either has Treacher Collins, which I'll just call TCS, Treacher Collins syndrome. So coming from a family that has TCS. The beginning of this book, she talks about all the various surgeries her son Nathaniel had when he was younger. And I get that each of these surgeries was a big deal and was really stressful. However, when she lists them off one right after the other, the reader kind of starts to not really care. And I'm not saying that to sound heartless. I feel like that's just storytelling 101. Even if it's, like I said, these surgeries were all a big deal. But just when you're listing them off right after the other, it's kind of like, okay, we get it, another surgery. So I feel like she should have just written about a few of the really big ones, go into detail about, 2 of them, just mention the others. And then I feel like that would have made the reader care more. Although I'm sure someone who has been through a similar experience would actually appreciate all the details about all the different surgeries. I don't know. But they did have a crazy story, though, because not only does her son have TCS, she also eventually, she has a second child, and shortly after he's born, she gets diagnosed with cancer. And she goes through chemo, and she gets better. But then she has other health issues and surgeries she has to get because of it, and then the cancer comes back, and so they had a lot of medical issues within their family. But back to her son Nathaniel, she talks about, one of the stories she talks about is when he got his hearing aids for the first time, and he was like 1 year old or somewhere around there, and how when he got them, he became such a happier baby. And that was similar to the book Wonder, because Augie gets hearing aids, and it just, like, he didn't realize how much he was missing out on until he got them. When the book Wonder came out, they talk about how the dad and the brother read it, and they just read it in one evening and they loved it. The mom, however, wasn't able to read it at first because it just hit too close to home. It came out when Nathaniel, I think she said he was like 8 or maybe older. But anyway, Nathaniel read it and it actually wasn't a big deal to him. Normal, the book, it goes back and forth between the mom's perspective and Nathaniel's, although it's mostly the mom's. But here's what he said about Wonder. It may sound strange, but reading Wonder was not a monumental occasion for me. Confession, no book is a monumental occasion for me. To me, Augie had medical issues that were similar to mine, but he was a completely different personality. But then I started to see what people were getting from the book and how it was actually changing their behavior towards me. That's when I understood how powerful the book is. That was monumental. And he would join the author, R.J. Pellaccio, when she spoke about it at schools, and he would be referred to as the real-life Augie. But here's what he says about that. I visited schools to support RJ in the book and because it was kind of fun. But in my day-to-day life, I don't want to be seen as Augie Pullman or the real Wonder Boy. First of all, I'm not the only kid with Treacher Collins. And secondly, I just want to be seen as a normal kid who just happens to look different. And Nathaniel has a really good attitude towards those who stare or are even taken aback by the way he looks. And his mom raised him to just think nothing of it when people stare. And so he's just been raised to not make a big deal of it, and so he doesn't. And they did have one experience with a woman who was similar to the mom of Julian in Wonder, which I'll be getting into that, but Julian is the bully and his mom is just really judgmental, and Nathaniel and his family did come across people like that. And with that particular woman, she talks about how that's the one time Nathaniel really was distraught over the way someone treated him because of his face. The reason I wanted to see this was the reason I wanted to read this was to see what it was actually like for someone with TCS and for the parents. And this book did give good insight. It made me realize that the way parents view things and how the child with TCS view things is very different. But I think that's to be expected, though, because the mom had to deal with all the stuff, all the surgeries and things when he was a baby or a toddler, which Nathaniel doesn't even remember. Plus, to Nathaniel and other kids with TCS, it's just normal for him because that's what he's always known. However, for the parents, like the mom giving birth to a child with TCS, that is a life-changing experience. So I feel like it just has a bigger impact on her because it changed her life. And I feel like she identifies more as like a parent of a child with TCS, more so than Nathaniel identifies as someone with Treacher Collins. Like, he just wants to be seen as just another kid. Like, he doesn't identify, like Treacher Collins isn't his sole identity or something, And having Treacher Collins isn't life-changing to him because he's always had it and it's all he knows. So that was interesting. So back to Wonder. The movie follows the book very closely. They left out a couple perspectives that were in the book, but overall it's an accurate adaptation. And with the acting, we have Jacob Tremblay, who plays Augie. He does a great job, and he's definitely one of the better child actors we have these days. I saw him in Room back in 2015, and he was amazing in that. In this, he has to wear prosthetics, for this movie, of course, and it would take hours to apply. But Tremblay, because he's a child actor, he can only work 9 hours a day. And so they couldn't have, like half the time spent putting makeup on, so they cut it down to 75 minutes, which was really impressive. But it's kind of funny, though, because they could have found someone who actually had TCS and had him play Augie, and they could have saved time and money. And Magda Newman comments on this in the book Normal too. But I get that finding a good child actor is hard enough, let alone a good child actor who also happens to have Treacher Collins. And we have Owen Wilson, who is perfectly cast as the dad who's always making people laugh. Owen Wilson may kind of play similar characters all the time in his movies, but I don't mind. Him and his brother Luke, I love them. And I think, maybe they're typecast, but I like the kind of characters they play anyway. And in the book Normal, she talks about how her and her family got to go to the set of Wonder. And she said how Owen Wilson was just so great interacting with the kids and talking to them. In the movie, his acting is good. However, he and Julia Roberts don't have very good chemistry, I didn't think. So his scenes with kids are good, but with her, I don't know, it doesn't seem natural or real. Speaking of, Julia Roberts plays the mom, and she does a good job. Like, she's not a bad actress, obviously. But it seems maybe a little miscast. Like, I feel like they could have found someone better. And like I said, she just doesn't have that chemistry. And the scenes where it's them as a family doing something, like tickling Augie or something, it just seems a bit too forced. And so we have Isabel Vidovic, who plays his sister Via. And no complaints with her performance. She did good. And there's the ending scene where they're giving Augie the standing ovation. And she's like seriously crying. So either she's like, it looked as if she was like genuinely touched by the scene. And we have David Diggs, who plays Augie's teacher, Mr. Brown. Normally, I wouldn't have even mentioned his character because he's a pretty small role. But it's played by Diggs, which if you've seen Hamilton, you'll recognize him as the guy who played Lafayette and Thomas Jefferson. So it was just cool seeing him in this role. And he does a good job playing the cool, friendly teacher. The other there's obviously a lot of child actors in this, and they all do a good job. Sometimes watching movies that, are about kids, it rests on the shoulders of these child actors, and sometimes, that's just not my favorite because kid actors can be kind of hit or miss. But these kids did fine, and I didn't find myself, getting annoyed by their acting, so I felt like it was fine. So some of the more minor differences. To start, in the book, August's room is covered with Star Wars related stuff, but in the movie, it's all outer space related posters and things. And they also had Mr. Brown be his homeroom teacher, whereas in the book, they had a different homeroom teacher, and Mr. Brown was just their English teacher. Also in the book, Augie made a point to sit in the back of the class, but in the movie, he sits in the front. In the book, Charlotte, it's briefly mentioned that one of the students, Charlotte, was in one commercial a few years ago. But in the movie, they made her like a current commercial actress, and that's what she's like blabbing on about the whole time when they're taking Augie on a tour of the school in the beginning. They also had the mom working on her master's degree, but in the book, so in both the movie and the book, she's an artist, and in the book, she was a former like children's book illustrator. But at the time, I don't think she was working. They never talked about her job in the book, and she wasn't working on her master's. And then, so we have the feud that happens between Via and her friend Miranda, and this was different because, for one, Ella, the third friend, wasn't in the movie, and in the book the three of them are friends, and on the first day of school, Miranda and Ella have just totally changed their look, to look cool, and they make it clear while they're talking that they had met up over summer, whereas Via hadn't been included, so she just feels totally left out because clearly they met up and decided to change their look and style without even telling her. So they sit together at lunch for the first however long, but eventually Via just goes and spends her lunchtime in the library instead. And then there she meets this other girl named Eleanor. And then she starts sitting with Eleanor and her friends at lunch, which are like the smart, nerdy group. Whereas in the movie, she sees Miranda at lunch and they talk briefly. And then Miranda goes and sits with a different group of friends, leaving Via alone to figure out where to eat. Another very small change is that in the book, The Science Fair Project, he and Jack make a lamp that is powered by a potato. But in the movie, they make like a film booth thing. Then near the end of the book and movie, they do a camp out at a nature reserve. And in the book, Julian, the bully, chooses not to go because he thinks he's too cool for that. But in the movie, he couldn't go because he's suspended when he's caught giving mean notes to Augie. And speaking of the notes, this is one of the bigger changes. In the book, so Julian is the main mean kid. And after Jack punches him, Julian gets the boys in their grade to pick sides. And there's a war between the kids. And the kids on Julian's side, they purposefully ignore Jack or will bump into him and just do mean things and leave mean notes to him. But through the year, eventually the other kids get kind of tired of the whole thing, and they stop picking on Jack. However, Julian does continue to do so. Jack and Augie never tell any of the adults about the notes. However, at the end of the year, the principal, he makes it known that he has somehow found out. But by this point, Julian's parents have already decided to transfer schools anyway, because they think it was wrong for this private school to have let Augie in. Also in the book, they weren't giving Augie mean notes, I don't think, as far as I recall, because they purposefully didn't bully him so much because they knew they would get in more trouble. So they would bully Jack because it seemed easier to do that. Whereas in the movie, Jack doesn't get any mean notes or anything, and there's no like war between him and Julian. It's just, mainly Augie. And also in the movie, we have another change where Augie is still into wearing his helmet, and he puts it on as soon as he's done at school. Where in the book, the helmet was something that had happened in the past, and they referred to it. And it had been like a couple of years since he'd worn it. In both the movie and the book, we discover that the helmet didn't just go missing, and that his dad took it and got rid of it because he didn't want Augie hiding his face. So that part's the same. One of the changes I didn't like was that they made Summer a smaller role in the movie. So Summer is one of his classmates, and on the first day of school in the book, Summer sits with Augie. She sits with him every day from the first day of school on. And in the movie, though, she doesn't sit with him until partway through the school year after he and Jack get in a disagreement. Speaking of which, in the movie, Jack starts sitting with August early on, and then August overhears what Jack says to Julian, after which August tells Jack not to sit with him anymore. When Jack is no longer sitting with him, that's when Summer goes over and sits with August. Like I said, in the book, Summer is sitting with him right from the start, and Jack never even sat with him until after they made up from their fight, and then Jack started sitting with him after that. And with Via, in the movie, she meets Justin when she is standing next to a bulletin board, and he asks her about the sign-up for the play. And she doesn't even notice the sign-up at first, but after talking to him and seeing him sign up, she decides that she's going to too because she likes him. Whereas in the book, she meets Justin when she starts sitting with the smart kids at lunch because he's part of that group. And so they eventually start talking and they start dating, and then she wants to sign up for the play, and she convinces him to do it as well. And he ends up getting the lead role. Via is the understudy. But Justin is really nervous about getting the lead role, and so Via helps him rehearse and stuff. And in both the book and movie, he plays the fiddle, but in the book, he's actually really into the fiddle. And he uses it during the play as a way to help, stay calm. And if he needs to pause to remember lines, he'll strum a few strings while he waits to remember the line. And Via also confides in her dad what's going on with Miranda in the book. So in both the book and movie, she asks her mom to come in her room after the mom is done with August because Via wants to tell her about everything. And in both, the mom is too busy with August, and so she never comes in to check on Via, but the dad does. And in the movie, he's like, "Oh, so how was your day?" And she's like, "It was fine." And he leaves. But in the book, he asks how her day was, and she actually tells him and confides in him what happened. When they do the nature reserve trip at the end of the year, when they get picked on by the older kids, in the book, it's still bright outside. In the movie, it's still bright outside, but in the book, it happens at nighttime, and it's pitch black without their flashlights. And so having it so dark makes it even more adrenaline pumping for them to be running away from these kids when they can't even see anything. And when they return to the movie, Julian's friends who stick up for Augie and Jack, they start telling people. And so by the end of the movie, everybody knows about the fight that happened, and everybody has bigger respect for Jack and Augie. And the teachers find out, and the principal finds out. And so before they go back home, the principal has called Augie's parents just to let them know what happened, but that Augie is all right. And in the movie, the word didn't spread, and the parents didn't find out till Augie gets home and he tells them himself. And so as far as the scenes that they just totally left out, the biggest one was the storyline with his hearing aids. In the movie, they didn't have him have hearing aids at all. Whereas in the book, that was a big deal when he first gets them for the first time because he's really worried about, being self-conscious about having to wear them. But as soon as they're turned on, he's just like, whoa, he realizes how much he was missing out on. And after that, he never goes anywhere without them, of course. And when they get in that fight in the woods, his hearing aids come off and he loses them. So that was a big deal because the hearing aids are expensive. However, they end up finding them because one of the older kids had taken them. And so they find them in the older kid's locker. There's also a scene they left out where Jack is at Augie's house the same time Justin is, because he's there with Via. And Jack and Justin leave at the same time, and Justin waits with Jack while Jack waits for his bus. While they're waiting, Jack goes into a convenience store to buy some gum, and Justin is watching him, and he doesn't know it's Julian, but he sees Julian and two of his friends go up and are like picking on Jack, but Jack just handles it really well, and he walks back over to the bus stop, and Justin asks what's going on, and Jack confides in him about, the war that's going on. After Jack gets on the bus, Justin goes down to the subway, and he happens to see Julian and his friends there. And so he sort of threatens them in a way, just kind of messing with them and telling them not to mess with Jack anymore. And I thought this was a cute scene with the two of them bonding, so I wish they would have included that too. Another change, so this isn't a scene they left out, but it's something they added with Justin, is that when he and Via meet, she tells him that she's an only child in the movie, whereas in the book she never lied about that. And with the play, it goes more into Miranda's story, where the reason she signs up to audition is just to get close to Via again, because she actually misses that friendship. And she wasn't actually expecting to get the role. Prior to the auditions, though, she was helping the drama teacher make copies of the school play, and she sees that it's The Elephant Man. And while perusing the script, she reads that it's about a man whose face is severely deformed. And so she tells the drama teacher that they can't do this play because she says her little brother has a facial deformity, going along with the lie that she had told while she was at camp, saying that Augie was her brother. And the teacher's upset, but she convinces him to change it to Our Town, which obviously, she lied saying it was her brother, but that was nice of her for the sake of Via. Overall thoughts, neither the book or the movie have become a favorite of mine, and I don't think I would read the book again, and I don't think I would watch the movie again. However, reading the book normal, although I wouldn't recommend that one either, because I feel like it wasn't poorly written, but it wasn't well written either. I find myself getting a little bored here and there. But anyway, reading normal did help me appreciate more what Wonder has done, teaching kids to treat everyone with kindness no matter what they look like. And just remembering that everyone is going through struggles, whether it's a struggle that we can see and is apparent, or sometimes it's a struggle that we can't see. In fact, more often, it's a struggle we can't see. So just being sensitive to other people and what they could be going through. And this goes along with the line at the end, Augie's quote about how everyone deserves a standing ovation because everyone is going through trials in this life. And between the book or the movie, I would say I liked the book more. Like I said, the movie does follow it really closely, but if you're gonna choose one or the other, I would choose to read the book. And like I said, it is a really quick read, and it also has more perspectives than the movie did, so I like that too. And she actually has a sequel, so to speak, to Wonder, where it has 3 other perspectives, including Julian's the bully, because in the book and movie we never see it from his perspective. So I am curious to read the second book to hear Julian's side. I haven't read it yet though, but she does have that if you read the book and want to also read that second part. And it's called Augie and Me, I think. If you buy Augie and Me, it comes with the perspectives of Julian, Charlotte, and then his friend Christopher, who we don't really meet in the book. He's just mentioned. And in the movie, he's not mentioned at all. Anyway, I admire the author for writing about this and taking the responsibility to look into it and to do research after the experience she had with her son. And like Nathaniel says, the impact this has had on the people who reads it is a big deal. And if it helps people treat others with kindness regardless of what the person looks like or whatever their background is, then it's definitely worth reading. And I certainly wouldn't discourage anyone from reading it. I feel like it would be a good one for kids to read for sure. Having said that, I can't see myself going out of my way to mention a conversation with fellow adults recommending it. But I think if you have kids like middle school, junior high, I think this would be a good one for them to read. And I guess that wraps up my thoughts on Wonder. I'd be curious for anyone out there who has Treacher Collins or something similar, or if you have a loved one with that. I'm curious what your thoughts are on Wonder, the book or the movie. and just hear your perspective of it. So you can leave a comment or send me a message, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, head over to my site, whythebookwins.com. You can leave a comment there and I will be sure to reply. You can also find me on Instagram under the same name, Why the Book Wins, and you can message me there, and don't forget to follow. And also don't forget to subscribe to my podcast and join me next Wednesday for the newest episode of Why the Book Wins.